So hi again, here's a practice exam from grade 8 stuff. It's good, middle school, important to master your, numbers, algebra, fractions. And so this is a good exposure to a lot of things here. So the first number here is, which of these numbers is a perfect square? So what's a perfect square? A perfect square is so let's look at some numbers here. So if I go 2 times 2, it gives me 4. If I go 3 times 3, it gives me 9. If I go 4 times 4, it gives me 16. And the list goes on. These numbers here, we call them perfect squares. Why? Because when we do the square root of these numbers, let's say 16, it gives me 4. So that means 16, there's a number, when you multiply it by itself, it gives you 16. That's what a perfect square means. A number, when you multiply it by itself, it gives you that number. So 3, when you multiply it by itself, it gives you 9. So therefore, 9 is a perfect square. So if you look at these numbers and you want to make a choice, which one is a perfect square? It is the 49. Why? Because 7 times 7 gives you 49. So what's special about the perfect squares? The perfect squares, we know the square roots of them. So square root of 49 is basically 7. Square root of 81 gives me 9, which means, 9 when you multiply it by itself, it gives you 81. That's what perfect squares are. Which consecutive square numbers is 20 between? So 21 definitely is not a perfect square, but what perfect squares 21 falls between? So if you look at the 16 is a perfect square because we know the square root of 16 is 4. And the next one to 21 is definitely 25 because the square root of 25 is 5. So these two numbers are perfect squares and 21 falls between these two perfect squares. And 21 is not a perfect square. The area of 4 squares are given: 262 centimeters squared, 251 centimeters squared, 256 centimeters squared, 266 centimeters squared. Now, we definitely know the square root of 256. It is 16. And therefore, 16 times 16 gives you 256. And therefore, this is your perfect square, or the area of a square that is a perfect square. This is the one. Suzanne wants to put a fence around her square garden. If the garden covers an area of 121 meters squared, how many meters of fencing does she need? So now look at this. She wants to put a fence around her garden. And it's a square garden. That's the key right here. Square garden. So basically, she wants to put in a square garden. She wants to put a fence around the square garden. So a square means all the sides are equal at 90 degrees here. The thing is, if all these sides are equal, we know the area of a square is the side squared. So now they told me what the area is. The area is 121 equals the side squared. Now, if you want to find the side, just square root both sides. And square root of 121 gives you 11. And that's how long the side is here. When you square root a square, the square root cancels a square. And so therefore, S, the side equals 11. So all of these are 11s. And if you want to know how much fencing you're needing, you just go 4 times 11 or add all of them, because adding 4 11s is the same as 4 times 11, and it's 44. So the answer for this one is 44. Find the square root of 100. So what's it's asking you, which number when you multiply it by itself, it gives you 100. And that is 10. What's 6 squared? 6 squared means 6 times 6. So when you have an exponent here, it's a 2. That means it's 6 times 6. If we put in a 3 on top, we call this exponent or power. It means it's 6 times 6 times 6 3 times. But when it's squared, it just means 6 times 6 twice. 6 times 6 or 6 squared is 36. Also, as you start using the calculator, there's a button that does that for you on the calculator, but definitely want you to understand what it means. So now find the sum of 3 squared plus 7 squared. Definitely you have to do the exponent first here because of bed mass. Bed mass, some people call it PEMDAS. So what this means is brackets first, which we don't have here, exponents second. So you'd have to do the exponents. So we don't have division or multiplication, and then we have to add the two numbers. So 3 squared is 9 plus 7 squared, which is 49. And 9 plus 49 gives you 58. And this is your answer. Okay, so we'll continue doing this. So now here they said the side length of a square, is square root of 49, find its area. So what they're saying you have a square, and square have 4 equal sides, and of course 90 degrees. And the length of the side is square root of 49, find the area. So now if we want to find the area is, you take the side and square it. So therefore, you take the square root of 49 and you square it. Okay. When you square a square root, what the square does, it cancels the square root and you end up with just 49. This is something we do in grade 10 when we do in radicals. We call these radicals. And students sometimes struggle that, when you square a square root, it cancels the square root. It's good to remember it now because you'll be tackling this in grade 10. So just understand the squares neutralizes the square root. So basically square takes away the square root. That's what the square does. If you want it in details, square means root 49 times root 49. You're going to get a big number, then you square root that big number, and it gives you 49. So just learn that the square always cancels the square root, and you get 49. Okay. So the answer here is 49. The area of a square is 12 meters squared. Find its side length. Yeah. So again, the area equals the side squared, and therefore the area they already told me is 12 and its side squared. What you need to do is square root both sides, and that will give you s, because the square root cancels the square, equals square root of 12. And that's our answer right here. The area of square is 30 meters squared. Find its side length is the same thing. So that's just repeating. I'll leave this for you to do. Find the square root of 16 times 16. Okay, so 16 times 16 gives you 256. And the square root of 256 is 16. Now, if you're in grade 8 and you want to learn more, 16 times 16, 16 has an exponent of 1 here, and this 16 has an exponent of 1. When you multiply the same numbers, then you add their exponents. So this becomes 16 squared because 1 plus 1 is 2, and you still have the square root. Then the square root will cancel the square and you end up getting 16. But regardless, if you want to challenge yourself, you could look at it this way, but you could just do this, and you should know your perfect squares, kind of memorize them. And square root of 256 is 16. Which whole number is closer to square root of 164? So look, we know the square root of 144. And after the square root of 144, we know the square root of 169. They're all perfect squares. Square root of 144 is 12, and the square root of 169 is 13. Now, which one is closer to this? 164 minus 144 gives you 20, and 169 minus 164 gives you 5. So definitely square root of 169, that's the one that's closer to the square root of 164. Now, what's the greatest whole number less than square root of 35? So square root of 35 is square root of 36, and square root of 36 is 6. Before 6 is 5, so the square root of 25 is 5. So what's the greatest whole number less than square root of 35? It is 5, because square root of 25 is 5, and that's your answer. Simplify root 11 plus root 10 to the nearest whole number. Now this here, you have to use your calculator. You have every calculator is different, but you have a square root button on your calculator that you could press. And so if you press your square root button on your calculator, square root of 11 is 3.32 plus square root of 10 equals 3.16. And if you add these two, you get, so they said to the nearest whole number, the answer will be 6.48, and the answer will be 6. So to the nearest whole number, 6, that means no decimals. If this was 5 or up, then you have to round that up to 7. But since it's less than the 10 decimal is less than 5, then you keep the 6 as 6 for a whole number, and that's about rounding decimals. The leg of a right triangle measures 5 centimeters. The legs of a right triangle measures 5 centimeters and 6 centimeters. What's the length of the hypotenuse? Yeah. Now, Pythagoras. So Pythagoras, you could do that with 90-degree angle triangles. And Pythagoras, so they're giving you the legs. So one of the legs is 5 and one of the legs is 6. We call this the hypotenuse. So this is always the hypotenuse. How do you know it's the hypotenuse? It's always opposite to the right angle. So see how it's opposite to the right angle, and it's the longest side. Now, what you get taught in the school is you go a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and c is the hypotenuse. So c is the hypotenuse. A and b, it doesn't matter. If you want to put the 6 for a or b, it doesn't matter. It just means each leg. So here you just go 6 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared, and that will give me 36 plus 25 equals c squared, and 36 plus 25, that's 61 equals c squared. And now you just want to square root both sides, and therefore c equals square root of 61, and that's what the answer is. Just gonna go to the next page. So here's right angle triangles and Pythagoras. Pythagoras says a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and c is always the hypotenuse. Now, the hypotenuse here is the opposite to the right angle, so it's h. So you'll end up with 12 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. That's 144 plus 25, because 12 squared just means 12 times 12, which gives you 144, and 5 squared just 5 times 5, which gives you 25 equals c squared. Always do your steps in sequence, and keep on writing your everything till you get to the final answer. So 144 plus 25 is 169 equals c squared. At this stage, you want to square root both sides. Square root of 169 is 13, and that's what c equals. You could write it this way, or you could write c equals 13. And that's your answer right here. Now, there's something about Pythagoras that I'm going to talk to you about, because it's something that, notes in high school, students get stuck on, and they always follow this formula. You don't really need to follow this formula. The shortcut is if it's the hypotenuse that you're finding, you just go To find it, I'm going to go square root of one of the sides squared plus the other side squared. And that will give me h. And you don't even have to square it because you're square rooting already. So now that's square root of 144 plus 25, which gives you 169. And square root of 169 is 13 equals 8. So this is quicker. You don't have to write the formula and stuff. So if it's the hypotenuse that you're looking for, you go this squared plus this squared. But if it's like here, it's a leg that you're looking for, then you go square root of the hypotenuse squared minus the given leg squared. So this, you can memorize it that way if you like, instead of having to memorize this formula. So I'm just gonna do it this way, and then I'll show you how to use the formula if you like formulas. Some students want to go a little bit quicker and maybe understand it in this way. So I'm gonna use this right here. So since I'm given the hypotenuse, then I'm gonna go square root of the hypotenuse squared minus the given leg squared equals r. You don't even have to write the square because you're already square rooting. Now, this requires your calculator. 37 squared minus 35 squared equals, that gives me square root of 144 equals r, and r equals 12 because the square root of 144 is 12. Now, if you want to go to the formula, then you go, okay, it's r squared plus 35 squared equals 37 squared, r squared plus 35 squared, 1225 equals 37 squared, 1369. And now r squared, you minus 1225 from both sides. That's algebra. And that gives you, that's gone. And 1369 minus this will give you 144. Now you square root both sides, and r is 12. So here's a word problem. The diagram shows two flagpoles that are 4.5 meters tall. The distance from the top of the left pole to the base of the right pole is 7.5. So they're telling you this distance right here. What's the distance between the two flagpoles? So they want this. Now you have a right angle triangle. You're looking for this, so we might as well just call it x, the unknown. Do we know this? Yes, we do, because both flagpoles are the same length. So this is 4.5. So I'm just gonna write 4.5 meters here. Now, this is Pythagoras. So Pythagoras, it will be a squared, which is x squared plus 4.5 squared equals 7.5 squared. So now you go to your calculator, find out what each number equal. So you get x squared plus 20.25 equals 56.25. X squared equals 56 minus 20.25 from both sides. That's gone. And then this will just give you 36, and therefore you square root both sides and you get x equals 6. Another way of doing it, since it's the leg that you're finding, then you just go x would equal the square root. This is just a fast way of using Pythagoras. Since you're given the hypotenuse, then you gotta go the hypotenuse squared minus the given side or the given leg squared. Again, if you're given the hypotenuse, you want to find the leg, it's the hypotenuse squared minus the given leg squared. But if you're giving the two legs and you want to find the hypotenuse, then it's this leg squared plus this leg squared. And then here, you could just put all of that in your calculator, square rooted, and you'll get square root of 36, which is 6. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. Find the product. Use a number line if necessary. You don't really need to use a number line. This is positive 6 times negative 7. When you multiply opposite signs, so positive times negative always gives you negative. Also the same thing if you switch it around, gives you negative. But negative times negative gives you positive. Let's remember these rules here, of course, and positive times positive gives you positive. So positive times negative gives me negative. 6 times 7 gives me 42. So my answer here is just negative 42. Find the product. Find the product of negative 6 and negative 11. So you have negative 6 times negative 11. So that's negative times negative, as we said, it's positive, and 6 times 11, 66. When it's positive, you don't write it because every number has a positive in front of it. Here, find the product of positive 8 and times negative 8. So these little brackets here, when they put them like that, it means multiplying. So this basically means it's positive 8 times negative 8, which gives you negative 64. So it's a good idea to get used to this. Sometimes they write it multiplication like this. Sometimes they write it in brackets like this besides one another, but we know that if they do that, then it's multiplication. Unless they add a plus sign in between the brackets or a minus sign, then it's adding and subtracting. It's not multiplication. Here's another one. Negative times negative is definitely positive. We don't have to write the positive since it's positive. And negative 15 times negative 8. So we know it's positive. So now just 8 times 15. 8 times 5 is 40. We put the 0 and 4 as a remainder. 8 times 1 is 8, and add the remainder 4, which gives you 120. And the last question that we'll do today is find the quotient of negative 12 divided by positive 6. The same thing that applies to multiplications, the same thing that applies to multiplication applies to division. So when you're dividing, this rule still stands. So just change the sign to division instead of multiplication. So a negative divided by positive is negative. So that will give me negative 12 divided by 6 is negative, and 12 divided by 6 is 2. We'll leave it here for today. We'll continue with this for next time. Again, so I'll be going between middle school and grade 12. I finished all of grade 11 and 10 series on my YouTube channel, but just so that we could build the foundations that some kids lack as they go to high school. So we'll be putting a lot of emphasis on middle school stuff. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. And don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe.